Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 125. We're in the middle of the 3 weeks, leading into the 9 days, which are the saddest time in the Jewish calendar. But, as the Rebbe emphasizes time and again, that the purpose of these days is not, God forbid, anything negative as an end in itself, but everything is toward the good. That these days be transformed into holidays, into celebration that will be revealed when Mashiach comes, which is a general attitude, as I pointed out in the last episode, a general attitude of Chassidus in general, but specifically you see it in the Rebbe. People ask sometimes, what is the Chiddush of the Rebbe over the previous Rebbeim? One of the things that is very revealed and very obvious is the Rebbe's attitude to the 3 weeks and the 9 days. So though the concept, of course, in Chassidus, is the idea that everything, every Yeridus, Tzedek Aliyah, every descent is in order to reach a higher ascent. And that the whole Golus, the darkness of the Golus, is to bring Yisur Min HaCheshach, to bring a stronger light, to achieve greater heights and unprecedented heights. This is the basis of Chassidus. Look at the beginning of Samach Vav when he talks about right away the purpose of the Tzimtzum Arishin, the great concealment that allows space for existence to be. And he asks the question, the obvious question is, since after the Tzimtzum, through Aveda, we will reveal the light that was there before the Tzimtzum happened in the first place, conceptually before. So what's its achievement? And he gives the two answers. One, that before, that the achievement will be that now even Kalim could receive the light that was there before the Tzimtzum, and before they could not, had there not been a Tzimtzum. And number two, there'll be an unprecedented Erchad, or something that even before the Tzimtzum didn't exist. So that principle is a fundamental foundation in Tanya and Chassidus Chabad all over. However, the Rebbe implemented it in action when it came to the 3 weeks and the 9 days. Interesting to note that even in the beginning, right in the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership in Tafshin Yud Aleph, he published then the Rishimus of the Tzemach Tzedek on Eicha, and with the Rebbe adding notes on it, and the Rishimus of the Tzemach Tzedek on Eicha, it focuses part of it on interpreting the verses of Eicha, Lamentations, which we say on Tisha B'Av, L'mal Yusa, in positive ways. And this is a recurrent theme that actually accelerated over the years, and especially in the Lameds, took on a whole new shape and form as the Rebbe wrote letters and spoke in Fabrengens, how these days have to we use every way possible to apitera, to increase things that transform these days into greater light. The Mukadshah says, the Minchas Elazar says, on the Mishnah, on the Gemara that says that just as your marbim besimcha, mishanichnas od the marbim besimcha, mishanichnas od mamayitim besimcha. When Ov enters, which will be this coming Thursday, Rosh Chodesh Av, when Ov enters, this coming Friday, Rosh Chodesh Av, it says mamayitim besimcha, we diminish and minimize in joy. So he interprets it, mamayitin, we mamayit of the negative elements of Ov, B'simcha, with simcha. Obviously a simcha that's allowed al pi halacha. P'kudei Hashem yisharim mesamcha leiv. And that tziyim b'mishpat tepodah v'shaveh b'tzdaka, as the end of the Haftarah Shabbos Chazain concludes that after all the negative things, that ultimately is through tziyim b'mishpat, through Torah, through learning Torah, and through shaveh b'tzdaka, charity. And that's why the Rebbe emphasizes adding in those two elements. And in Torah itself, especially in the laws of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, both in the Rambam, and before that in the Mishnah Midas and Tamid, especially Midas, and before that in the book of Yecheskel. So you have Teresh B'Ksav, which is the Novi Yecheskel, talks about the Midas, the measurements, particularly about the Beis Shlishi, and then Masechta Midas, and then in the Rambam Hilchos Beis HaBchira. Based on the Medrash that says, when Yecheskel came to Hashem and said to him, once you destroy the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash will be destroyed. How can we redeem ourselves? How can we recreate it? So besides Migdash Ma'at, that the creation, the concept of a Beis HaKnesset is a Beis HaMedrash, the Eibishter told them also that when you learn, you'll study the laws about the Beis HaMedrash is kol ha'esek b'teiras elah, the Gemara says. Anyone who studies something is ki'ilu, microcosm, or ki'ilu, as if they're actually creating it. Why? Because Torah is tackle bara Isa bara alma. Torah is the blueprint for life. blueprint for existence. So when you study something in Torah, even though it may not be there in actual, but the Torah, you're studying the blueprint that creates it. So by studying it, you prepare the ground, and maybe even more than that, you actually prepare the building of, because the building requires first the blueprint. So when we learn the laws of the Beis HaMikdash, in this period in time, we're countering the effect of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash through the Hilchos Beis HaBchir. In the 9 days, of course, an additional thing is making siyumim. The Rebbe Nishmasei and the Rebbe Rashab make siyumim each one of the 9 days, even if you don't eat meat. The whole purpose of making a siyum is that it should be able to make a sudas mitzvah. A sudas mitzvah because you make a siyum, so the siyum ad mitzvah allows for a suda, for a meal. But the point here is the adding of joy as an end in itself. And additionally, obviously, adding also an Avos Yisrael, the unconditional love, Avos Chinam, just as the destruction of the temple, the second temple, by the Romans 1948 years ago, was due to sinas chinam, as the Gemara says, baseless or senseless hatred. So Avos Chinam is again the counterforce. By increasing in that, we counter the force, as the Gemara says in Yerushalmi, Kol Der, every generation that does not rebuild the Beis HaMikdash is as if they destroyed it. How could you say that? We weren't there, because it's a perpetual thing. Every moment, there's no Beis HaMikdash where the Shekhinah is not resting, and there's no total fusion between heaven and earth. We are also responsible, because we can do something about it. What can we do? We're countering the forces that cause this fission, this schism, this separation. What caused it? Barchenu Hashem, Barchenu Avinu Kulanu Ka'echad, where God is with us when we're all together. It brings the blessings. When children are disagreeing with each other and children are not liking each other, the Father cannot rest among them in a conscious and revealed way. And that's the basis of Golus. So when we create unity on our level, in our dimension, in our lives, that's the keli, the klei magzik bracha, shalom, peace. Peace doesn't just mean the absence of war. Peace means the completion, the wholesomeness of that shalom brings, a harmony. That in turn, imavatal the sibi, you destroy the cause. That was the cause for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. You then bring back the Beis HaMikdash Hashlishi. So here we have actual practical suggestions that the Rebbe has b'chol b'loshen shel bakasha, and as I said, especially in the Lameds, the Rebbe began to accelerate this with the Mivtzayim, the different letters that the Rebbe wrote, at Tav Lamed Gimel, and Lamed Daled. And Tav Lamed Gimel was also that summer, the Rebbe spoke much about chinuch of children, Temekah Shel Beis Rabbim. Now later, after the war, the Yom Kippur War broke out, that Tav Lamed Daled, that next, right after the summer, in October 1973, the Rebbe said, Niva v'lo yodem aniva on himself, that he prophesied and didn't even know what he was prophesying. Something was pushing me, the Rebbe said, to talk about the chinuch of Tanekh, the education of children, which is, of course, one of the powerful methods of lahashbis, eiv, and misnakim, to prevent and to protect from enemies. So these are directives, as I said, that was Tav Lamed Gimel, Lamed Dal, Lamed Hey, the Mivtzayim, and then throughout the years, it became stronger and stronger. And though it doesn't say anywhere this specifically, but one can easily speculate without going too much on the limb and saying it because in each generation we have our challenges, and the Rebbe taking the last generation before the Geula and the deeper darkness that comes in Ikvus Mashiach, which is right before the darkness, the deepest darkness right before the dawn, the Rebbe in so many different ways emphasizes the whole point of Chassidus, but in a very direct way, how these 3 weeks and these 9 days are really there, our potent energy waiting to be released through our work. So we have directives, we have an attitude, and above all, the psychological approach, the applied Chassidus approach, was that there's no such thing as a negative as an end in itself. So in our own personal lives, if we have the 3 weeks or the 9 days in our own personal lives, Rahman al-Islam, no one should ever know of anything, any type of loss or trauma or tragedy, or setback, or anything that causes a certain type of constraints, beinam tzarim, straits, dire straits, know full well that within it lies powerful, powerful energy that we can tap and we can transform. We mamayit it, we can diminish it, besimcha, when you do it, besimcha, al-pitera, of course. We don't do weddings, but according to pitera, meaning learning, tzedakah, and other things that create a simcha in these days, that joy is the best counterforce to all the negative elements. Connecting it with the chapter of Matos-Maasei, so the Shalah, famous Shalah that the Rebbe cites often, it says that even though the holidays and Yom Tovim happened, like Tisha B'Av happened long after the Torah was given, and yet, because the Torah is, as I said, a blueprint, the Torah has in it the entire picture of existence. As such, the Torah has hints in the chapters to the days that we are in now. So there are hints in Matos-Maasei to the events of Tisha B'Av and the 9 days and the 3 weeks in general. One obvious thing is there's the famous mimer of Checholzu from the Rebbe Rashab, Tofresh Nun Tes, which he said when there was a unfortunate outbreak of machlekes and sinas chinam in the community. And Cholzu is, of course, a mimer from this week's parsha in Patis, one of the two parshas, Matos-Maasei, come together, that talks about machlekes and agdus. And it's a powerful mimer that talks about how to reintroduce agdus in a place where there is disagreement. The Rebbe Rashab actually said the mimer more than once in the beginning of the year, the Tofresh Nun Tes, and the details are there, are printed. So that's one hint, because what does it have to do with the Cholzu, with Midyan? Midyan is from the word Modain. Modain is machlekes. Machlekes is divisiveness, and which is everything opposite of Kedusha and holiness is divisive and fragmented. And Kedusha, holiness, is all about unity and harmony. Think of it in this way. Everything unhealthy is about things that are broken apart, and health is about harmony and bringing things together in a seamless flow. A human body, when it's healthy, it's a seamless flow. When it's, God forbid, unhealthy or dysfunctional, there is inconsistencies, there are disparities and incongruence and misalignment. So the goal is, when you see such type of something broken, the point is to repair it. And that itself is the kavanah. As we'll discuss later in the Chassidus question, the kavanah of Shviras HaKelim, Chassidus says, is not chas v'sholom for the Shvira. It's seiser al manas livnes. It's a shattering, a breaking, in order to build even a better building in its place. So you can raise a building, raise with a Z, and the whole purpose of it is that build a greater building in its place. So the purpose of any type of negative thing is always to bring a more powerful force to transform the negative into a positive. And then the negative becomes a fuel that actually is fueling the positive, because without it, you wouldn't have that intensity and that commitment and devotion to achieve these new unprecedented heights. Matos-Maasei comes together. So there are a number of sikhs where the Rebbe talks about it briefly. Matis is from the word Matis, Ela Matis, refers to Matis, the Shvatim. So the name for Shvatim in Hebrew, you could say a Shevet, which is a tribe. You could say a Mata. What's the difference between Mata and Shevet? So a Shevet is considered to be a soft twig. A Mata is like a hard staff, a dried stick, like a walking stick, that's firm and inflexible. A Shevet is still a sapling or a type of a reed that's still a soft. Maasei is Ela Maasei B'nai Yisrael. Maasei refers to the journeys of the Eden as they were going from Mitzrayim to the Promised Land, 42 journeys, and now we come to the end of Sefer Bamidbar, the fourth book, which is really the conclusion of the journey. This next book will be a repeat, where Moshe repeats everything that happened the last days of his life, 37 days from Rosh Chodesh Shvat till Zayin Adar, and then concludes with the same ending where this chapter concludes, and that is the journeys of the Eden through the Midbar Amim, through the wilderness, Midbar Sinai. And that refers, of course, to every journey that we take, and especially the journeys that we go through the dark, the Eretz Sea of Oyef, the dark and desolate and thirsty, the wilderness that is Nochashar of Akrav, which is filled with all kinds of adversarial forces, and we need to have protection from them. And through this wilderness, we reach the Promised Land. The 42 journeys, as it says in Svarim, Baal Shem Tov and others, that every one of us goes through these 42 journeys in our lifetime. Baal Shem Tov even says that we all go through 42 journeys every day. A number of years ago, I did some research because I wanted to see where can you find the 42 journeys. So Chassidus talks about some of them very explicitly, but I researched and found, and I wrote up, that you can find on meaningfullife.com, you can find a short type of each journey, what it represents in our personal lives, based on different Maimorim, Chassidus, and other Svarim that talk about it. So these journeys are not just the journeys they went through then. Eila Maasei b'nei Yisrael, like Chassidus explains, Eila Maasei b'nei Yisrael sheyotzim mitzrayim. Only the first journey was that they left Egypt. The 42 after that were all 41 after that were all steps after that. But as the Frierdiker Rebbe explains in many places, Kimei Tzeichem Eretz Mitzrayim, Aren Meflois, that all journeys are going out of the constraints. Mitzrayim like Bein HaMtzorim, the constraints of life. It's not just the first journey when they actually left Egypt and they went to the Fidim, but every journey, all the way till coming to the west, to the east bank of the River Jordan, was all about a journey going out of the limitations, the constraints, the inhibitions, the fears, all the elements that keep us trapped and fettered and in some way limited. Journey toward what? A journey toward Eretz HaKodesh, Eretz Yisrael, the promised land. So that's the ultimate purpose. Where do you see this journey, the darkness of Midbar in time? Midbar in space is the journey through the wilderness. In time, the Midbar is the 3 weeks. And hence the connection. And when Matos-Maasei come together, in one sikha the Rebbe speaks, a number of sikhas, he says, Matos on one hand is firmness, Maasei is movement, mobility. Similar to Nitzavim and Vayelach. Nitzavim is Nitzav Melech, standing firm and strong. Vayelach is movement. And the Rebbe explains that because the ultimate goal is to have a combination of both. That for something to really be successful, you need to have a firm foundation that rests on like a tree, on powerful roots that are unwavering, mates. On the other hand, you need to grow Ma'alim B'Kedesh and move higher and greater and greater and greater. And though initially it seems paradoxical, but you'll see every healthy organism, every healthy structure has those elements. It has certain steadfast foundational principles that are unwavering. And once you have that in place, then you can build and blossom and grow in so many different directions. Which, of course, in a time like this, when we're dealing with a darker moment in our history, a darker moment in our lives, that's when you need both these elements even more than ever. On one hand, you need to not be affected and not become in any way demoralized or in any way disconcerted by the challenges that we face, personally or collectively, which is the firm matis. On the other hand, we have to keep moving, forging ahead. We can't just say, now is the time to just lay down. No. You forge ahead every way possible to move forward. The Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, gives a fascinating analogy from the spiral staircase, brought in several places in Chassidus. It's called Schwindeltrepp in Yiddish. Schwindeltrepp, Schwindel means a swindler, a thief, someone deceptive. Why would you call spiral staircase Schwindeltrepp? Because unlike a regular staircase, where you walk up, even though it may be a long staircase, but you see the destination. When you climb a spiral staircase, you have to constantly make revolutions and turns and turn your back to the destination. So as you climb higher, every second step, you're turning and you can deceive yourself into thinking you're not making any progress. To the point that right when you're about to reach the apex, the top of the steps, you have to make one final turn and you could say, hey, you know what? I haven't achieved it. The importance of seeing things through and recognizing, as he explains, that is a particular type of journey. The journey where you go through darkness to come to light. There's journeys where you go from one step to another step in a light way, from one light to a higher level of consciousness. But then there's a journey where you have to go through to the point where you sometimes don't see the destination. Actually, it seems completely dark. Similar to the cycle of the moon. There's the cycle of the moon where it's completely dark, only to just be reborn then. Then it begins to grow, to wax, and then till the 15th of the month it becomes full, and then it wanes. So this is the journey of life, and the wisdom to know, Ezu Chochma Re'es Hanela, to know the birthing, that even though you may not see the birthing right now, it's a process. And knowing that every step is going toward that process. And that is by divine providence, that's the plan. So even though some of the steps are setbacks for the moment, and it may seem like it's a type of retreat, in truth is everything is forward movement. Sometimes you move forward in a conscious way, and sometimes you move forward by stepping back in order to make a forward thrust that's even more powerful. Like when you want to jump, you need to go back and gather your strength and then jump forward. So Matos-Maasei comes together where we have both these elements. Okay. With that said, let's go into a question that was asked about this parsha, and a good segue, as well as some of the discussions here about bitachon and some follow-up, which all fits to the discussion, especially in a time when things are seeming darker. So think of the 3 weeks and the 9 days as a time where we can learn lessons of what do we do when we are in a more darker phase of our calendar, of our life. Darker meaning on the revealed level. So here's a question that was asked. What was the purpose of the miracles in the desert? This week's Pasha narrates the story of the Jews' travels in the wilderness and all the miracles done there on their behalf. The mon, lechem min hashamayim, which was the bread from heaven, and anani hakoved, which were the clouds of glory, and of course be'er shel Miriam, which was the fountain of Miriam, the water, because they were traveling in a wilderness. We know in a wilderness you don't have food, and you don't have protection, and you don't have food and drink. So in the schus of the three great people, Moshe Rabbeinu was the man, the Anani HaKavod was b'schus Aaron, and the Be'er Shel Miriam was b'schus Miriam. Later, when those two passed away, Miriam and Aaron, all three returned in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not the place to discuss what was the corresponding element of each one of them. But the bottom line is they were these miracles. What was the purpose and significance of these miracles? Were the miracles in the desert just to ease the household work of women and simply about convenience? I guess the person is referring to, actually they write that. Yeah, that the purpose was because the Anani HaKavod, the clouds of glory, are in their clothing and they didn't have to do laundry. The clothes that grew on them. Okay, we'll read it in the second version of a question in a moment. Or is there intrinsic value and significance in these miracles? Can miracles in general be merely God making things easier for us, or is there always a deeper meaning? And what lesson does this have for us today? Another version of this question: if Hashem does not make miracles for naught, which is a drosha saran, loy oved HaKadosh Baruch Hu nisan l'magona, does not make any miracles for no reason. What was the purpose of the man, no food preparation, the Anani HaKavod, which are in the clothes that grew on them without bodily waste, no diaper changes, which severely lightened the household tasks of the woman? Thank you, and thank you for your continued devotion to the community. And finally, another question in this regard: are there modern day miracles? So, everything, yes, absolutely has a purpose. First of all, the most important purpose is to realize, as the Rebbe Marash says, the parnasa in our time is like mon, meaning coming from heaven. Anyone who's in business recognizes that as much as you do make your effort, there's always that blessing of God that's coming from heaven that's necessary. Birchas Hashem hitashir, the blessing of God that makes us wealthy, that makes you wealthy, as we discussed last week. I'm discussing now in more detail. So the Jews were preparing to enter the promised land, where they would toil and work the fields, and seemingly would be much more natural the way they would gain their livelihood and sustenance. So as a preparation, we always know that it always really comes from heaven. Even when you're working the fields, it's also hamayim b'chei elomim v'zereya, as the Gemara says, Tesvus, that it says hoya munas itecha, that hamayim b'chei elomim v'zereya, that one who believes in God v'zereya and sows his field, like the Zayah says that Rabbi Yainus Sabah would when he went to a meal, even though the food was there, he would daven to Hashem to give him food, because we recognize that even when b'derech hateva, when natural means seem to be the way we're getting our sustenance, it's always coming from a higher place. So that's the most basic reason for the miracles, to train the Jews to think and acclimate them to the idea that even when they'll enter Eretz Neshavas, a civilized land, and they'll be working in the fields and doing the natural things, they should always know that within the natural lies supernatural or supranatural, extraordinary divine powers. It's in the basic level. As far as the specifics, is it to make it convenient? If it was make it convenient, why doesn't Hashem continue doing it forever? Because the purpose is for us to work, but to recognize, as I just said, that there's a higher meaning. As far as these three particular miracles, they touch upon the three most important necessities of life, which is food and drink, mazon, and garments. And the Anani HaKavod is like the house. So you have mazon, levush, bayis. Chassidus talks about these being the three forces of sustenance we need. We need mazon, food, simply to survive, to sustain our bodies. We need levush garments in order to protect ourselves from the weather, from the elements. And we need shelter. We need a roof over our heads. So in the Midbar, which was a type of temporary journey through the difficulties of life, which is symbolic of the journeys that we take today as well through our difficulties, through our challenges, these are the three elements that are part of a person's existence. And that's why these were the three. Here it says it's not the place to get into Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, but that's the purpose of it. Now each one specifically, think of the man, Lechem min hashamayim, what does it teach you? To look up to heaven. That know your bread is coming from heaven. The Gemara talks about the difference between Mitzrayim and other nations. In Mitzrayim, because there's no rain, the fields are irrigated from the river Nile, so therefore they never look up to heaven to pray, for kshamim, for rain, because they see it right there and they worshipped it and they turned it into Elokah, into a god, into a deity, the river Nile. When you look up to heaven, it's symbolic of understanding that things are coming from a greater and a higher place above us. And the same can be said about the other elements, that they came miraculously, as I said, to indicate and to help us understand that everything really in our sustenance, even the natural things, really have a deeper divine purpose, are coming from a deeper divine blessing. Now, of course, there are other reasons as well. I'm just giving one. And so regarding the question, the segue into are there modern day miracles? Absolutely. So Chassidus explains that in miracles, there are three types of miracles. Actually say two types of miracles, but three types of behaviors. There's anhoga tivis, there's anhoga nisis. As Chassidus brings often from the Chassidus Yitzchak, in the Mamorim of Chassidus Hazeh, in Samavov and other places in Be'era Teira Boy, that Chassidus Yitzchak was a sefer that explains that Tishrei is the Rosh Hashanah of anhoga tivis, of the natural order, and Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah of the miraculous order. What are these two orders? One is a natural order that we see every day. We see the sun rising, we see the clockwork of nature. But then there are times in history where there's a shidud hateva, there's a suspension of these laws to teach us the same thing, that don't ever convince yourself that the nature, that nature is what's driving it. Nature, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Perikites, he says, teva is a word used for anything we don't understand. We say an act of nature. What does an act of nature mean? It's an act of God that's dressed up in the garments of nature, which teva is gematria lakim, ha-teva is gematria lakim, the divine that's concealed, and teva also comes from the word tovu b'yamsuf, it's submerged, just like when you throw an object in the water, you don't see the object anymore. Nature has a powerful way to conceal the forces that are brimming under the surface that define that nature. On a somewhat of a humorous note, even though we live in a world where they say that people say they want the freedom of not wanting to have to believe or faith, yet when it comes to insurance policies, you'll see that it always says that this policy covers, let's say, a homeowner's policy, a house. It says it covers certain things, but does not cover hurricane or an earthquake or lightning or other acts of God. So I once asked an attorney, a real estate attorney, I said, why do you write acts of God? And we live in a country where some people don't claim they don't believe in God. And here's suddenly acts of God. Why don't you write acts of nature? She said, because acts of nature legally can still leave an opening. Maybe if it's an act of nature, maybe there's insurance company's problem, not the person they're insuring. When you say act of God, it's very clearly not in our control, it's God. So clearly when it comes to financial gain, suddenly God becomes the convenient scapegoat, just as an aside. But nature is simply a word that's saying, when you say nature did it, Mother Nature, whatever it is, it's another way of saying a force, a divine force. But so there's nature. Then there's the breaking of nature, which is the suspension of nature, is a miracle. The Chassidus says there are two types of miracles. Miracles that are melubish b'teva, like Purim. Now if you look at it close, you look at it face value, it just seems like a random series of events that happen to lead to a miracle. And then there are miracles that are begoli, like you see at Mitzrayim, where you see clearly it's suspension of nature in more than one way. But here's the most powerful statement of all. What is the deepest miracle of them all? Is actually nature itself, not even Purim. Because as the Baal Shem Tov says, what's the difference between a natural event and a miraculous event? He says it's frequency. Chacham Tzvi says something also similar, that basically Teva is nisim tchufis. It's many miracles, one after the other. Frequency. If the sun were to rise once in our lifetime, everyone would come out and say, wow, what a miracle. But since it happens every morning, if one child was born, you'd say, well, a miracle, where did this child come from? But it happens every day, thank God. Millions of healthy children. So we take it for granted. When you see someone struggling to breathe, you suddenly realize what you take for granted, the 18 or some breaths that we take every minute that we don't even realize, how many mechanisms have to be in place. So the truth is, nature itself is the greatest miracle. It's just happening, in the language of Chassidus, Chiddush HaYeshonus. Chiddush HaYeshonus, which means that God is renewing existence every second anew, as he explains in Shari Yichud V'Amunah from the Baal Shem Tov, L'Olam Hashem Dvarcha Nitzah B'Shamayim, but he does it in a way that you don't see a break. It's not like you're being renewed as you were when you were born. If you're 20 years old, you're renewed as a 20-year-old. If a tree is standing for 100 years, it's being renewed as a 100-year-old tree. Even Adam and Chava in Gan Eden had a mature universe. They looked up, there were stars in heaven. We know that stars are light years away. So the world is created in a way that even though there's a constant energy that's pulsating and being renewed, and that itself is the greatest miracle of all, Yesh Ma'ayin, as he explains in Tanya, in Shari Yichud V'Amunah, even greater than Kriyas Yamsuf. And yet, which we discussed a few months ago, the details of that piece in Shari Yichud V'Amunah Perek Beis, yet it's done in a way that you don't see a break. It's seamless. But don't ever think that it's less of a miracle. So we have miracles happening all the time. There was a time in history we needed to see it openly. A miracle, a nes, Odem Nisi, is like a flag, also called nes, to lift us up. But the purpose and kavanah is dire betachtenim, nesava kodesh baruch hu liyisle baruch dire betachtenim, that we should recognize that nature itself is the greatest miracle of all. The reason I'm elaborating on this is because I want to lead to the follow-up to questions that were asked last week, and that was about career concerns and issues around secular education, marriage, and making ends meet. So I think this is a good, and as well as we're going to talk about bitachon. So there were a number of questions that came in, and I was pretty strong in responding to someone, and I hope I didn't offend anyone, but I said it very intentionally, deliberately, and with strong words, because we have to understand what Chassidus came to teach us is that yes, we live in a world where nature is created by God with certain laws, and we have to do our effort, b'derech hateva, but never think that it's not part of the divine plan. And this reflects mostly in our attitude to parnasa and income. Now, as much as we may not like this statement, but Chassidus emphasizes time and again, parnasa is a bracha min hashamayim. And there lies, it's not just that you acknowledge God when you're in davening in shul on Shabbos or Yom Tov or Yom Kippur. Acknowledging God above all, where it really makes a difference, is in the real matters of our natural daily lives. To say we take a weekend or we take a moment or we go study, that's beautiful and that's necessary. But where you really see the expression of someone's faith and someone's trust is when they are dealing with the things that are so-called part of the natural order. How we make an income, how we make a living. Like the Rambam says about a Talmud Chacham. Well, who's a real Chacham? Where's he niked? How do you see a Chacham in Hilchos Deis, in the beginning of chapter 5? You see it not in his oratory skills and his learning and his scholarship. You see it in his or her behavior. How he eats, how he drinks, how he sleeps, how he does business, how he talks to people. So the best Even HaBeichen and litmus test of our attitude, what Chassidus wants to influences us to not have Hanochas HaElam, which means the axioms of the secular world, which is I'm a self-made man, Keiche ve'etzim yadi. Everything I do is based on my own self. Maybe I acknowledge God as being somewhat sending me a blessing. Some people may have the superstitions. The truth is, ein eid milvade. All of existence, every fiber of existence is divine. The fact that we don't see it is our own blindness. And what Chassidus wants to teach us is to permeate our lives with that awareness. So the first place that awareness plays itself out is how you look at making a living for yourself. And so therefore, I made it very clear, as the Rebbe's talks and sichos about, is that ultimately it's God's blessing. Now, kamuvan, obviously, we have to do whatever we can. What we were blessed with, use the resources, because part of God's gift to us is our resources, our intelligence, our emotions. And yes, we need to sometimes get the training necessary to do a particular job. But when you begin to worship the keli and forget the blessing that making that keli work, the vessel, that's where you get into problems. And that's where the worries and so on. So with that, let me follow up some questions that came in on this topic. And I'll try to cover as many as I can with the time we have. And then if something I don't cover, I'll cover next week. Okay. So here's the thing. Let's begin just in this particular order. If I'm wasting my time anyways in yeshiva, why not get a secular education and a job? Okay, very practical question. So here's how I would frame it. Let's even assume that the yeshiva you're talking about is unable to motivate you and inspire you. Let's even say there's something wrong in the system there, giving the worst case scenario. Even then, the question is, so how do you deal with that? Do we take ourselves out of yeshiva and out of the school system because it may not be serving the person well and throw them into the job market, or in a secular education which can create, maybe, yes, it may train you to do something, or it may open up a whole bunch of other can of worms and challenges that will not necessarily get you a job and just get you more confused. So the way I would approach it is the following, and this I've been looking for a direct settler from the Rebbe. I do remember there are answers from the Rebbe to people in this regard. If anybody listening knows of an answer, either in the Rebbe's Igris, the letters, or an answer that the Rebbe wrote privately to someone, or anywhere where he talks about this, because I remember a number of things that I did see over the years, but I don't have them in front of me. The bottom line is this: the reason we go to yeshiva, the reason we go to a chinuch al taras hakedesh, is a few things. Obviously, the first and foremost is the learning, is to become prepared and to learn and be trained to know what it is, what Torah wants of us, and to be trained to be a good Jew, and that's refined and durgenumen, permeated and infused with a Torah way of life. But there's also the environment of a yeshiva. A good environment is teachers who are Yireh Shamayim, God-fearing people, refined people themselves, and it's an environment that creates a role modeling, an example. So you can have an excellent school that's training well, but it doesn't have the right environment. You can have the right environment and not have the right training. So a good yeshiva should have, obviously, all of the above. I'm not here to start going and analyzing and measuring which yeshivas are living up to the highest standards, but I went to the yeshiva system myself, so I know some of it. I know some of its weaknesses, some of the strengths. And it wasn't always black and white. Sometimes it's dependent on the teacher, dependent on other factors. So the first thing is this. If we indeed have challenges in the yeshiva system, the approach has to be not how do I get myself out of it and go find my way to nes nefesh, as nefesh nafshi tzalti, meaning I save my own skin and not do anything about it. Maybe one of your missions should be, this person who's writing this or any of us, is to go ahead and help improve the system. If it's a system that's bringing up our children and it's our families and our communities, are you just going to ignore it? Or maybe you should do something about it. Now, I know, of course, the argument will be the system, nobody wants to listen. The schools are very political. People in power don't want to give up power. They're not interested in any real change. They're interested in control. Maybe true. That still doesn't mean we give up. If anything we've learned from the Rebbe, and I speak as a personal witness, is there's no such thing as giving up in a good cause. So the way I would frame is when I hear a question like this, it breaks my heart that a person could even ask this. It means the yeshiva is so bad that he's ready to do something of this nature. So my answer is that obviously based on the age, but generally speaking, the environment of a yeshiva, it has its own particular osmosis power, and that is very critical. And just think the grass is green on the other side and I'll just go get a secular education and a job. There's also an environment there. It's not just training. It's also an environment that often creates more problems than it solves. That's number one. Number two, depending on the age. If you're talking about someone who's already out of the yeshiva system or is already older and is already making choices, if case by case, you speak to your mashpia and he says, maybe it's an idea to take an hour or two and maybe train yourself in whatever computer programming or something else that can help you feel fulfilled, that may be an option.
I'm not going to say it is or it's not, because that I think has to be done case by case with your individual mentor and mashpia, and it's not. However, it's not off the. It's not a non-option. But then there's a third thing, which I should have actually mentioned before this option, and that is, I believe firmly, without any doubt in my mind, that one of the things the yeshiva systems, both the boys and girls, have to do is to excite our students. Some people are academically inclined and scholarly inclined, by all means. Why not create projects? Why not create exciting and different creative approaches, all al pi Torah, all within Torah, to excite the creative juice, to get the creative juices flowing in our students, so you don't have a question like this. This is something that's sorely lacking. We should be demanding excellence, not mediocrity, but excellence. Because I hear this complaint again and again. And I can speak for myself. I came to the 770 Yeshiva from Morristown, and I was not necessarily going to sit and just press a bench. It wasn't that type of masmid. I needed something like a project to motivate me. And then God sent the Rebbe a nittel night, Tovshin Lamed Zayin, in the year this would be 1976, end of 76. The Rebbe instituted something called Sefer Lekutim Dach Tzemach Tzedek, encyclopedia of the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek Chassidus, and also bringing the other Rabbeim through there. And this was like, to me, it was I can't tell you kind of how it saved my life. Because it gave me a cause, it gave me a project, and it was scholarly, it fitted my personality. I didn't know what I was doing, but I volunteered, became part of the team, and things never were the same. It changed my life. And this was the Rebbe initiated, and he said anyone who does this project is like they're keeping Seder Yeshiva. That was also unheard of, because we worked during the Seder Yeshiva. It was not an extracurricular activity at night or weekends, on Sunday, whatever. And Sunday is also Yeshiva, Mitzvah Shabbos. So I saw from that, and I have no doubt that the Rebbe instituted something like that. It means it's a model. We need to come up with creative projects of that nature. The essay contest that we did elicited, I can't tell you how much excitement by Bochrim and by girls in the girls' schools. Halavai even more. But we need to come up with ideas like this to engage people, not just to be excited about the learning and about Torah and about Yiddishkeit and about Chassidus, but also that empowers. That's what trains you. I was trained on the job, through learning, through trial and error, how to write, how to structure, how to publish. So it trains you. This itself is the best training. And I see no reason why we shouldn't be doing similar things. Now, in a particular case where a person has this situation, I would say, I'm not endorsing wasting time in yeshiva. What you have to do is find some type of project for your own life to be involved in and get excited about it. That's why I would not suggest just going off and getting a secular education and a job for the reasons that I mentioned. Next question. Should I be concerned about my income when it comes to shidduchim? Before I became religious, I had certain ideas of a career to pursue. I had been involved with several nonprofit organizations in my youth, and I saw myself pursuing a nonprofit career in the future. Nonprofits are not known to have huge money-making jobs, but I felt I would generally be happy going to the office every day. Then after I learned yeshiva for a few years and starting pursuing shidduchim, I was told that I should pick a career that makes more money. Fellow members of ANAS started stating how much yeshiva and seminary tuition costs, cost of sending kids to camp, and everything else involving in having a big family. Especially since we don't put a limit to the amount of children we have, it all starts to add up to serious dough. It was also pointed out to me that nowadays, frum girls want to feel monetarily comfortable. Unless you're pursuing a girl that wants to go on shlichus, it is better to find stable work that can provide for a big family. I took this advice on good faith, and am now pursuing a degree in a line of work that will most likely make a great parnasa and has a lot of job security. I also feel that I would have an interest in this line of work, but at the same time I know I'm pursuing it mostly because of the difference in salary. This all makes me tense about the whole prospect of shidduchim. I feel I may be sacrificing my personal fulfillment in a career just to fill the role of being a breadwinner. This line of thinking to pursue bigger pockets would have not entered my mind if I had less to do with Yiddishkeit. But now that I don't see myself living a life devoid of it,
I feel caught between a rock and a hard place with regard to starting a family. I do think that I would still try to settle down to start a family if I were to live in a secular life, but the amount of children I would want to have would be proportionate to the monetary support I could provide. But the Torah sees every child as a blessing and doesn't limit it to a bank account. It requires me to see a bigger parnasa as a priority to be a responsible father. I know that a parnasa is only a keli to be able to have a proper Jewish home, but it gives me anxiety that I cannot find a proper Chassidish girl to become my wife unless I can make a bigger salary. Especially since in this day and age, frum women tend to pursue careers more substantial than being a teacher or secretary. I feel like there shouldn't be this inordinate amount of pressure for me to be some big macher that makes 6 figures or more. So my question is, should I have more Kabbalah sel to the idea that pursuing more money is part of my role of being a husband? And should I accept it b'simcha v'tuv levav, or am I receiving bad advice and I really should pursue a career that I would enjoy and consider looking for a nice Chassidish girl that also has a substantial enough job to make ends meet? Okay, very good practical question. There are 2 elements to answering this question, and I have reiterated this a number of times. And this is one of the limitations of doing something like this online, where speaking to many different people with different backgrounds and different approaches. I have to first be faithful and do justice and true to what I was taught and what the Rebbe would say. And that first thing the Rebbe would say in all these things is Birchas Hashem Hitashir, and bitachon, which means God's blessing is what makes somebody wealthy. And that we have to have bitachon and trust. This does not mean we should be reckless or irresponsible. It means that that's a critical foundational element. I must begin with that because that is the key point in all these discussions. You want to build a home and family that's wholesome, that's happy, that's devoted to a higher purpose. I see people who have made a lot of money and are very successful, and they have miserable homes and miserable families. Now, of course, I know immediately someone will say, but that doesn't mean they have to have. My point is that that is not the key to the successful home and family. Is not the key, is just making ends meet. Obviously, being resourceful, being creative, using your talents, getting some training if necessary, is all fine and good. But as I mentioned from the Maimorim Chassidus, to do more than you need is not what you need to do. You need to make the keli correct. And remember, it's God that blesses. That attitude is the best possible thing for a marriage, for a spousal relationship that's with harmony, and for effect on our children. You can look around and you see this as a proven fact. This doesn't mean we have to enter with the type of attitude that will be struggling our entire lives. You do what you have to do. And this is where I have to go to the second part of the discussion. How you make the keli and what you should be doing in that regard is case by case. There's no one answer. Some people have certain skills. Maybe they should get some training to develop those skills. Other people maybe have other types of skills. So it's very critical to discuss this with someone who's like a coach, a life coach, or I would say a mashpia and a mentor that understands these matters, to figure out how you make your keli. There's some people, as the Rebbe encouraged, that went to college and they almost got their degree, and the Rebbe encouraged them to finish their degree, and even insisted that they pursue the career they were studying for, because Hashgacha Pratis led them that way. Everything is case by case by case. What I see consistently in many of these questions is that there's almost like the losing the first point. The bitachon is not emphasized. And again, it's not to be critical. I don't sense, this question you're asking honestly, which way? My answer is the bitachon way is always the way to go. Then comes the keli. Then we start making the keli more important than the bitachon. That's where there's a problem. And I sense in some of the questions being sent, people are definitely, we live in a world and we are slowly, it's easy to succumb to the levushei hateva, the garments of nature, which is why I elaborated earlier on what a miracle is. And we lose sight of the divine power in our lives, the divine force in our lives, especially someone who grew up in a Chassidish home, an environment where they were taught something that the world does not know, the purpose of your life, why your neshama came down to this earth. I just saw a sikha from the Rebbe, came to baleben andere, to help other people, to serve. That's the foundation of why your neshama came down to this earth. So how could we be replacing that with just taking care of myself and my needs? And I say this with all respect, but this whole foundation of Chassidus and Torah is that you are God's messenger on this earth. and God's messenger to bring light, to bring Torah, to bring Kedusha, to bring holiness, to bring the Geula. Yes, we need to make a keli to be able to make a living, but that's a keli, that's the second element. That's the tools. To start worshiping the tool chest and forgetting why we have tools in the first place, that's what I keep on resisting and trying to convey. So I think it needs a combination of first the foundations, and then comes the way we actually go ahead and use those foundational bitachon trust elements to implement it in each one in a particular way. Now there are more questions in this spirit. I'll read one more. They're all relatively, let's see, I want to read it here. Last week, good evening. Last week you made a judgmental comment on our generation that we like nice things and we spend more, and it's not the necessities that is nowadays way more expensive than before. I don't think our budget strains come from going out for dinner or leasing a car. Having to pay $2,500 a month at a minimum for a half-decent two-bedroom apartment. $10K year tuition per child, inflation in the food industries, a streimel, etc., is where all the money is going. It's unfair to put a young men and women in the world without the tools to find a good job to pay for these necessary expenses. You know quite well that for most communities who are against education, moving to low-rent areas isn't really an option. When even open-minded people defend this way we educate, there's no way we'll have a positive change anytime soon. And he concludes, you're still the greatest. Thanks. Okay, so thank you for saying that. That's very consoling and very encouraging. Well, I just reiterate what I said before. I think that's a combination. I'm absolutely not trying to be judgmental. God forbid, that's the last thing I would want to be. And I don't believe I am judgmental. I was talking about standards. There is a standard. There's a standard. Why Torah tells us, not keichev eitzim yadi, but the Eibishter gave us the koyach. That the Eibishter gives us the power and the tools and also the resources. So even that's also coming from a divine place, and we have to do our part. I think we need to find a balanced place here where bitachon is the driving force, as I said, and the keli b'derech hateva is the second element here. And it's case by case by case. I know people who are successful, other people that are struggling, and I think you must talk to someone. Don't sit around and just be quiet about it. Talk to someone who can help you fix the situation or improve your situation should you be in dire straits financially and so on. It's not meant to accept. I'm not suggesting accepting poverty or accepting anything that's straining, because at the end of the day, poverty is also a strain on relationships, strain on family. So to do something about it. But I'm talking in more general terms, general strokes of the approach, of a Chassidish approach to this particular topic. Okay. There is more to say on this, and I will reserve more questions we'll deal with in the next episode. So this will be an ongoing discussion and dialogue. Yes. Okay. Next. What steps can I take to achieve more bitachon? Okay, so that's also a good segue. And here's the question. I've been grappling with the concept of bitachon my entire life. Even though I've come to realize the power and absolute necessity of bitachon in a Jew's life, it still evades me. It seems there's a major gap between understanding bitachon and actually living differently because of it. How do I bridge the gap and allow what I know to tangibly affect my attitude? Another writer writes, thank you so much for these weekly broadcasts. It's amazing to know we have somewhere to turn to understand the Rebbe's teachings. Thank you for addressing bitachon before. I have a question from a different angle. I've always found bitachon to be very hard for me to relate to and understand, and beyond intellectually, how to actually think, feel, and plan in a new way. A therapist once told me that although I am okay, otherwise I would have a harder time with bitachon because of certain difficult experiences. I have had. It is hard for me to believe that Hashem really wants to help me, even though I have experienced so much good in my life. When push comes to shove, I see the Eibishter as being chas v'shalom, exacting and vindictive. It's like there is a disconnect in my thinking. A few weeks ago, I decided to really make an effort to live with more bitachon. I have been studying the Rebbe's letters and sichos on bitachon every morning, and when I get anxious, I have tried to push away negative thoughts, but it's not making a very deep impression. If I miss one day of learning, I'm totally thrown off. It doesn't sink in. Is there anything else I can do to achieve more bitachon? Okay. Bitachon means trust. Think of it in the expression that the Meir Primishlan, when you're bound above, you don't fall below. So let's start with this. Bitachon is an unbelievable asset because we're human beings, as mortals, as fragile, as vulnerable creatures. We, subject to our own whims and our own tools and skills, we're limited. Let's be honest. Bitachon is a gift given to us that our soul has a connection to something that is immortal, that is eternal, that's higher than the vicissitudes and the limitations of human existence. So it's a gift. It's a gift that each of us has naturally within our souls. But also bitachon, because a soul naturally is, as he explains in Tanya, Perek Tes, like a flame that senses its source. So the question right now is how to access that. But it's critical to understand that bitachon is not just some type of challenge or some type of responsibility. How do I find bitachon? It's a gift. It's an opportunity of building self-confidence because you know you're connected to something greater than yourself. So the key two things that are necessary is not to worship things that weaken your resolve, and that's when you hang around with people, or you rely on nature, as I mentioned before. That itself weakens you. If you invest all your life in making money, money can never give you eternal security because money is a physical a reality that always will diminish. Just like the food we eat. There's nothing in this physical world that does not deteriorate or erode. We can't take our money with us to the next world, in the spiritual world. The only thing that gives a person eternal security is spirituality, is soul matters. So the key is, the real question is, how do I connect more to my soul and less to my body, and less to my material needs? Which of course brings us back to Chassidus, like in Perek Lamed Beis, to make nefesh ikir and gufei tofel. So the way to do it is a long-term way, there's a short-term. The long term is have a steady diet, a steady dose of learning Chassidus, what a neshama is, building the confidence and strength that your neshama needs to deal with every particular challenge in life. The short term is behavioral things we do. When you wake up in the morning and you say, Maida'ani, think about what that means. God just gave your soul back to you. He's renewed your contract. It's a vote of confidence. Throughout the day, instead of focusing on negative thoughts, focus on how you can help somebody, on tzedakah. I should mention before that, davening, learning. These are all tools given to us on a daily basis to help cultivate, nourish our faith and our bitachon and our trust. So you're asking how? You do this day by day by day, sometimes behaviorally. This is not about analysis and philosophizing how do you get into a bitachon state of mind. It's about doing things. Actions, as they say, your heart follows your investment. If you do things, after you do something, it brings your heart and mind more into it. So actions and acclimating yourself by learning about neshama things and actions that are consistent to that is the key to building bitachon. There's no shortcuts. These are the ways to do it. And you go with that attitude that you're looking to build that connection to something that's greater than yourself and trusting it. It's like trusting yourself, but trusting your neshama, trusting the divine soul that you were given. Okay. Let me go one final question, which I said I was going to talk, but I'll be quick about it if I need to talk about more, and that is a completely different topic. Why does my soulmate have to be Jewish? Every creation from man to pebble has a soul that allows it to exist. Why does my soulmate have to be Jewish then? Why does my soulmate have to be Jewish then? Is it possible that the counterpart of my soul is a non-Jew? If non-Jews have souls, why can't my soulmate be a non-Jew? So, there's of course, the first answer is, that's the way the Torah says it. God said so. That God who created human beings, and yes, God created every human being with a divine element, B'Tselem Elokim, divine image, the same God said that there's a distinction. Just like there's a distinction between a Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, a priest, a Levite, and an Israelite. There's a distinction between a man and a woman. There's a distinction between nations, and there's something that makes them unique and distinct. It's not about inferior or superior. That marriage does not work for that combination. And it's not about our logic. That's number one. That's on a very basic level. On a deeper level,
We have to remember the mystery of marriage is more complicated. It's not just a transaction between two human beings. It's called kedusha. It's a sacred union, a binyan adiyat, an eternal union, which requires a third partner. And there are conditions. The God who created the human being made conditions how that spiritual connection is made, the soulmate connection. So this does not take away at all from the non-Jew's soul and the non-Jew's life contribution, and they may be a great person. The question is it a person for a Jew? So the Rebbe writes in a number of letters, there's a very interesting letter he writes actually to the non-Jewish girlfriend of a Jewish guy, how it's not good for you and not good for him. If you really care about each other, you should break apart, because marriage is not just about a friendship, it's about a spiritual chemistry and dynamic. In addition, there's of course the practical elements of things like issues of compatibility, religious issues, even though they may not come up right away, but later when you have children, they usually do not lead to good results. Marriage is difficult enough without that. There's a wonderful book written by my colleague, Rav Lezer Shem Tov. He wrote a book on this topic, Why Can't I Marry Her, I think it's called. You can find it online, where he goes through a whole dialogue he had with someone about this topic, so you could have a lot more details there. So suffice it to say that we're dealing here with a powerful concept called marriage, soul connections, and soul connections require the right type of souls to mix with each other. Now, to understand what's the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew is another discussion, not for the scope of this conversation right now. Okay, with that, let me go over now to the topic of the question of Chassidus Question, which is really just a follow-up to last week's discussion on bechira, free will, and pre-determinism. So I discussed last week the concept that the question was Neida Alila al Bnei Adam, that God created this major libel, this great setup and conspiracy on the human being by basically the Torah says that a human being will die by the result of eating from the tree of knowledge, and the Torah already has established that he will die because the Torah precedes existence and it makes a statement. So I discussed that component based on the Maimorim from the Mitler Rebbe and Teres Chaim, as well as the Tzemach Tzedek, and so on. But there's some things I didn't address completely, so I want to cover that in this part too. But with doing that, let me read two questions that were asked to me in this regard, which I think will help segue into the topic, into this part too. I've been a regular listener for about 2 years. I was excited when you brought up the subject of free choice versus predetermination on your last broadcast during the Chassidus Question part of the program. You said you would discuss part 2 this coming week. I sent in a paper as part of the essay contest for 2015 and collected 10 sichos of the Rebbe on this subtopic. I could not help wondering if you had any recollection of my submission and if you thought it contributed to the discussion. On the same subject, 2 or 3 weeks ago, you made reference to a sicha of the Rebbe from Nun Aleph that discussed the subject. I tried to find it on HebrewBooks.com.org, but the only thing I came up with was a sicha that included a discussion about Poland and a fast that used to take place. If you could clarify what volume that sicha is in, even holding up the actual book on your program, that would be appreciated. No one in town seems to have the volume you're referring to. Thank you. Okay. And then there's another question that came in Hebrew, who asks also that thank you so much for your fascinating classes, and your fascinating and very flavorful or colorful classes. And please, if you don't mind, since you're speaking on this topic of Neira Alila, I would be happy if you can. I'm translating. If you can explain it in understanding what the Rebbe says about Chatoim, sins are also based on divine providence, and he quotes a few places from Basel Legani Tavshin Lamed Aleph, and from Dabe Kadeshim Tiyu Tavshin Chaf Aleph. Okay. So let me first answer to the original question, the first questioner. Yes, I did read the essay. It's an excellent essay. I don't remember whether we posted it or not, but I'm going to make sure it's posted now this coming week, because you cite 10 talks, and that's a very good collection of the Rebbe Sichas on this topic, on this complicated topic. And I thought it was a very well done and definitely contributes to this discussion. And for all of you who want to see that essay, I will be posted, hopefully, if it's not posted yet, on meaningfullife.com/MyLife. Go to essays /essays-2015. So we'll have that essay posted and featured. And some of what I'm going to say is taken from some of these talks. So here's the dilemma here. And I'll be brief again because of limited time. If you need more explanation, we can always extend it to another week or some future episode. So the question is this. On one hand, we know everything is divine providence. And divine providence, seemingly, if every detail is divine providence, what about the choice of a human being of good and evil, right and wrong? Because we know that also is absolute. Because the Rambam says at the end of chapter 5 in Hilchos Tshuva, that it's a Yesod Gadol, it's a fundamental foundation, and without that, all of Yiddishkeit falls apart, basically. So these two facts, how do you reconcile these two elements of Hashgacha Protis, Hashgacha, and which seems pre-determinism, and not just pre-determinism, but divine providence, that God directs it all, and the element of free will. Now, I want to refer you first of all to the Maimer Vayachlim Tovshin Ches, where the Frierdiker Rebbe says it very specifically. The words that he uses there is that even the Chet is al pi hashgacha al yena. Similar to the Teres Chaim that I quoted with Neira Alila, that's not just the death, but the Chet itself, God helped set up. But in Vayachlim he says stronger than al pi hashgacha al yena. And there's the Sikh in Likutei Sichos Chelek Hei Lech Lecha, where he addresses this Vayachlim, Tovshin Ches. The Maimorim that I mentioned, Bos Lagani Lamed Aleph and Kedeshim Chof Aleph, also discuss it, and with all the footnotes, they bring all the different sources. I also want to refer you to sources to look at Likutei Sichos Chelik Zayin, Volume 7 in Likutei Sichos, beginning page 365, several pages where the Rebbe talks about it. It makes it very clear in responding to someone, you can't say that free will is a dimion, is illusion. Only we see it that way. The truth is we really have no free will. But God is basically running the show. He says you cannot say that. And there the Rebbe addresses the question, as the Rambam does, addresses the same question in Hilchos Tshuva, and that is the question of Yediyah and Bechira. And also the Teres Chaim, the Neira Alila discussion, Yediyah and Bechira. Which Yediyah, knowing, God's knowing, seems to be connected to God's Hashgacha. And the answer they give there is that is the answer that the Rambam gives, is that we don't know how God's way of knowing, and God is able to know and not affect us. The Ravid, in his Asagas and comment on it, says, why are you asking a question and saying we don't understand God? What's the wisdom in doing that? And he gives the example of a fortune teller, someone that can tell the future, and that doesn't affect, it's actually a result of what you do. That's what causes the knowledge to be the knowledge. So it's like you know it, just like some people know something that happened after it happened. This person happens to know it before. Now, how do you explain that? Like, for example, like if someone said tomorrow someone will throw a stone, I know it will fall. That doesn't cause your knowing is not causing it to fall. It's because it falls. The nature of something is to be affected and fall. That's why you know. But how could you say the same thing with free will? With the free will. So that's where the Rambam says we don't understand how God can know beforehand that which will happen afterwards. That's the only thing. But the Yediyah is not machriach. That's what the Rebbe says. Yediyah, knowing, is hachrich. Forcing your hand is a contradiction to free will, not knowing of it. But the question of Hashgacha still seems to be something that needs explanation. Because there, okay, fine. So there's the footnote in the Hadran of the Rambam in Tov Shalom Advav, by Yakel, footnote number 14, where he discusses this explanation from Medrash Shmuel in the name of famous Medrash Shmuel. Yeah, the Rab Moshe al Mushinu. It's also brought in the Teisei Shantif, who gives this explanation about Yediyah and Bechira, that Yediyah doesn't affect the Bechira. So then why do you need the Rambam's answer? If that's the case, why does the Rambam say that we have no way of knowing God says? So he says, because this rule that Yediyah doesn't affect the Bechira is al pi seichel, and God doesn't run by seichel. He could have done it in a different way. So we see right away here that there's a higher dimension in understanding this, and the Rebbe refers to it also in some of the letters in Chelik Zayin, that you have to go to another way of understanding what's called Sevav Kalam. That the idea of the Eibishter, Das Elyon, you could say, is such that is removed and does not impact. So though there's a hashgacha, and there's a plan, but the plan does not impact our choice. How do you reconcile the two? Because we don't understand how God knows. And that's beyond our way of understanding. But nevertheless, there's a big plan. And here you can go into also adding into the equation something we spoke about a few weeks ago when I spoke about Rabbi Yisrael Yaleib. So there's the Rebbe's letter. The Rebbe's Sikha, he spoke then, Yud Tasir, Tavshin Yud Beis. It's printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 27, page 363. And a shorter version in Cheli Gimel, volume 3, page 976 in the footnote, where he says that the general plan is the Hashgacha, but the speed of how it will happen, of how fast it will happen, and how it will happen, that is up to Bechira. So that adds another component into it. And I would add something else in the philosophy of Chabad by Dr. Nissim Mendel. I saw, and I asked him about it, that in explaining something, I saw right away that it was something that looked like did not came from the Rebbe. With the Rebbe asked the question there, he writes that if the Geula comes anyway, what difference does it make if the Geula comes a minute later or come a minute earlier? At the end of the day, the Geula is going to come. Yisrael and Shuvim, Huftach Teira promises the Teira, Eden will do Tshuva and Geula will come. So let's say we don't do the Aveda. What difference does it make? And he says there, because time is a creation, every moment of time needs also to be refined. And if the Geula comes, Chaz v'Shalom, a second later, that second that the Geula could have come earlier, it will never have been redeemed. It'll be a Geula, a second, a moment that remains in the domain of Golus. So I called him and I asked him, where does that come from, that idea? And he said the Rebbe wrote it in Hebrew and he put it into English. So based on that, you can see here as well that even though the plan will be fulfilled, but we have the control whether every aspect of our lives is going to be part of that elevation. So in explaining the Tovshin Ches and the Maimorim, it says very clearly, time and again, that even though the Hashgacha is and leads us that there is a world that potential sin can happen, and not only that God maybe sets up and that we will do a sin, and not only that, it's a situation where the sin, but never the situation where the sin will happen, never is the sin the Ratzon Elyon. It's always Hepech HaRatzon. Tzimtzum, God made it Tzimtzum, but Tzimtzum is not Hepech HaKavana, Hepech HaRatzon. The Kavana is Tzimtzum b'shvil Hagili, not b'shvil Atzmei. That's the key thing to understand. So even if in the bigger plan, which does not affect us, as I said before, even the bigger plan, at the end of the day, the actual negative thing is not the intention. The intention is what positive element will come out of it. That's very clear in all the discussion on the matter. God forbid to ever say that the kavanah is in the chet itself. The question is how we choose and not impacted by that kavanah. That's what we're discussing here. And finally, when you talk about atzmus, not memala kalam. Memala kalam, as I said, you could say it's like a idea that does not affect us because it's God's mysterious way of knowing something. Like the Navi, like someone who knows what will happen, but it doesn't affect because it's like knowing it afterwards. Or seviv kalamin, because we can still say what God's knowing creates us. So how is that possible? So seviv is in a form of makif, it does not impact us. When you talk about atzmus, there's a whole other aspect to it. That it could very well be that the final picture is obviously completely the way atzmus wants it. But the point of bechira here is that we're not nitfis, which means we're not compelled to do something. Even though, when you say, for example, can God choose evil, God forbid? We say, no, he can't choose evil because it's not possible. Because whatever God chooses is good. However, he does not choose because he has to, because he's compelled to, but because that's what he wants to. And he's given us, the human being, a taste of that etzem, that we also have an ability to do something which is not natural. Every creature on earth follows its colors, follows its personality. We can suspend that when it comes to right and wrong, as he explains in Vayachlim, in Tovshin Ches, because that area God gave us an aspect of his that you're not nitfis, you're not compelled. You're doing it because that's your etzem, but you're not compelled to do it. So it's not whether you choose good or evil, it's the way you choose it is not through any type of something that is an imposition or imposed from a force outside of yourself. It is what you really want, and it's just a matter that you're not compelled to want it because you're not compelled by anything because you have that divine essential element in it. I know I've been brief and there's a little complicated subject, but this is some of the discussion about predeterminism and free will. There's more to say about this, but suffice it for now. End of the day, I want to sum up again and say, God forbid to say that there's ever anything in the actual negative. It's only the positive that comes out of it. So there's a setup. Of course, the whole world is set up that way. We're created the Yetzer Hara. What do you need more than that? We're created in a world, an agnostic world, where the tzimtzum allows for all kinds of things to happen. If there was no tzimtzum, God did not create the tzimtzum, we wouldn't be capable of doing something. But the tzimtzum allows for room for something opposite. And even when there is, as I said, even when there is a setup to the actual thing, it's still not compelling because it doesn't affect us, that plan. And the plan itself is also only for the good, for the Yehof Chiyam Meil L'Sasun L'Simcha L'Moedim Tev. Now, let's do the essays. Essay number 1 is a framework for the fragmented. Yosef Bronstein, age 31, student at Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies, teacher at Yeshiva University in New York. Yosef Bronstein. He begins, my life is extremely fragmented. As an adjunct college professor toward the end of a long process of doctoral studies, who was involved in Jewish college campus work, and as a hired hand for a research project, I feel that I am a person with many masters. Not to mention that my wife and I are blessed with 2 children, and my wife works full-time. He goes on to speak about his in a very personal way, his fragmented life. But he says how he copes stems from the last public address of the Rebbe, which would be Vayakal Tovshin Nun Beis, and talks about the idea of ingathering Kehillah Kalahakil and how that leads toward the Geula and Mashiach. And the key, says, is not by quelling the diversity and only focusing on a single project as a solution, but it's by finding the common thread and the mission in all that you do, which becomes the hub that connects all the details and the fragments. A good essay, and he says, I personally most identify with the Rebbe's unnervingly simple answer. God is the ultimate answer that creates the connection between family and work and all the different things that tug us in different directions. As the unified source of all diversity and the basic essence of one's own soul, dedicating all of one's diverse activities to God is the ideal way to fit together the different pieces of life's puzzle. He talks about Hatzlach in Zman, success in time as well. Okay, good essay, well resourced. Next, the other 2 are Hebrew. The languages your souls speak. Eitan Gurion, age 36, Menal Pnimi Yeshivas Ketana, Heichel Chabad, Tzfas, Israel. This one is about finding balance in this world. Finding balance among the different things that are tugging at us as well. And how to make decisions, correct decision in this regard. He explains the battle of the animal soul and the divine soul and the animal soul in Talia in very practical life situations. So it's a very practical application of Tanya, and speaks about the 2 voices, the animal soul's voice and the divine soul's voice, and then how you reconcile the 2. As I said, even though the ideas have been stated, but it's a very creative, original way, applying it to real life. And the bottom goal is not to eliminate the animal soul, but to convince it, to persuade it, to understand the value for it to follow the divine soul's direction and guidance. So that's essay number 2. And finally, personal development, a 3-step program by Oz Zuckerman, age 22, Yeshivas B'nai Akiva, Ma'alot Yaakov, Yeshivas Hesder, Kfar Haroya in Israel. Here he talks about the perpetual tension between what you want and what you have, and uses Ava Musateres, the hidden love that the Alter Rebbe talks about in the second part, after Perikut Ches and on in Tanya, chapter 18 in Tanya, and does it in a 3-step process. First, setting a goal. Number 2, training yourself to reach that goal, and finally, actualization and permeating all your details with this deeper sense of love. Well done as well, and I commend you for that, again in Hebrew. And with that, we cover the essays, and we conclude this program, MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 125, with a concluding blessing that as we approach the 9 days, may they become, even before the 9 days begin, days of Yom Tevim, Yom Sasnu Simcha Moedim Tevim,
days of joy and celebration with the Gula Amitis Vashleim, with Mashiach's coming, which is a direct outgrowth of this darker moment. So even though the kavanah is not the 3 weeks, not the destruction, the kavanah is the rebuilding afterwards, but there was a higher plan that even this becomes part of, especially in retrospect, of bringing to a greater place, to bring the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, which will be an eternal Beis HaMikdash, Gula she'en achareh golos. Thank you very much, and everyone have a simchadika week in the context of the 9 days and the 3 weeks, and using it through Pekudei Hashem Yisharim Samchei Lev. Every possible joy that we can do that's allowed is a joy that weakens, mamayitin, the power of and all its negative elements. Be blessed. Thank you.